So, in an effort to keep everyone in the Rogner family updated on what's happening with Ken's Barn Museum project, here's an update. Early in July of 2019, the farm is looking good. The house that my great-grandfather built in 1883 before he got married and after his brother moved out, after he bought out his brother and Henry moved away. And back to the barn. Let's take a look inside and see what's changed since last year. When you step into the barn now through the main entrance, immediately to the left is an alcove that's newly lit and finished, and it begins by giving credit to two people who the early history of the Rogner family played a very, very big part in discovering. First, Robert Rogner, who in '04 wrote a book about our family and its history from the early days in Austria, from the 1420s, all the time until they moved to Frankenmuth, our branch. And Sandy Rogner Mühlfeld, who did the 700-page book with all the descendants that was part of the 100th family reunion in Frankenmuth. So this alcove gives credit and shows a history in photos of all the places that Pat and I have been blessed to travel. That is where the family lived from the 1420s until finally they left Germany, Bavaria, and moved to Frankenmuth. On the opposite wall then is the move from Frankenmuth, where Michael Adam bought an 80-acre piece of woods that we're standing in the middle of and put his two oldest boys there. And the rest, this is a history more of Frankenhilf and Richville, as well as the St. Michael's Church, which the Richville Rogners were a part of. And everything, including the path they took to get from New York to end up here, as well as plots from the 1880s that show all of the Rogner lands in this area that were platted at that time. The hallway, as we walk into the barn, are the tools that were used to build this barn. Hey, nobody ever threw anything away in those days. We think that recycling is some new idea, trust me. The Rogners have been recycling and repurposing for a long, long time. Beginning with George Michael, Mike, who built this barn along with his brother, cleared this land and then built the house, as well as developed everything around here. In 1883 he bought his brother's share, and his brother moved a mile away and married a Holzai girl. But all of this is maintained in stories now and photos back to the generations that followed George Michael. There's a bit of Rogner reunion history here as well. A little bit of story about it on one side of the hallway with additional photographs. On this side we moved to the second generation here, which was William, Bill, my grandfather, his wife Katie. A story of her family, how they came from Russia. They were a German family in Russia. And then we move on to the next generation, which is my dad, Erhard Pops Rogner. In 1979, this farm became a centennial farm, still in the same family, so in 2025 it'll be 150 years. Music's always been important. A little bit of history of my grandfather Bill and his playing in the Denmark Township Farmers Band, as well as my dad, who up until the 80s played in the Frankentrost Band. Speaking of music and its importance to the family, here's a new display that includes some of my dad's instruments, some unique things like a ukulele, his original, the first accordion he ever owned, the King Liberty trumpet that he took his lessons on and that he played all the way through into the Frankentrost band. And of course the entire interior of the barn is now loaded with memorabilia, tools, forks, shovels, everything that was left behind, a milk separator, a cream separator, ice cream maker, all of the things that my mother's stove in the kitchen that kept the kitchen warm. She loved having a wood fire. Early blacksmithing tools from here on the farm, as well as a bean picker, corn sheller, fanning mill, and all of those kind of implements that were used here on the farm, as well as a little story of each one and how they were used and when they were used. On the far wall is the bicycle built for two that my parents took along down to Texas. All those winters they spent in Texas. And of course overhead we continue to see the beauty of all those hand-hewn beams and the roof supports that were put in place. This particular barn, the second barn, was built at just about the turn of the century, so about 1899, 1898. It was the second barn. The first one in 1875 burned. At the front of the barn, the photo of my grandfather at the wheel, his dad on the running board, his three sisters in the back seat of the 1908 Buick. Then the license plates from that car and a bunch of other license plates that have been collected over the years take us in Michigan all the way from 1910 up until current. Books, history books, and just a general, some interesting things like a kraut maker, when you sliced the cabbage over a couple of sharp blades for sauerkraut. The bottom drawer in this cabinet is metal because that's where you kept the flour and the bread so that it didn't attract bugs, so that it kept it clean and nice. Wash tubs that my mother had down in the basement over the years. A trunk that came from Bremen, Germany, that my mother's family brought in the 1800s when they came from Germany to the Frankenmuth area. There's a shallow well pump manufactured in 1920. And then this entire area is dedicated to my grandfather, Mike Denzer, who was an entrepreneur. He sold his farm in 1945 at the end of the Second World War. Moved to Reese, where he bought a blacksmith shop and converted it into a frozen food locker. He was a butcher, he was an auctioneer, he was definitely an entrepreneur, probably anything except a farmer. Avid hunter and fisherman, and there's a whole collage of his experiences, butchering, auctioneering, and as I said, hunting and fishing. The penny scale that sat outside of his business for all those years in Reese. The big scale for weighing deer as they came in and so on, for part of the deli that he owned and the butcher shop. There's all kinds of small items. There's still one big blank wall, and that will eventually be, as I get to it, the history of my family and my sisters. It will also be eventually Chris, who lives next door, story of his family, and he is the 5th generation, and Justin, who is the 6th generation. So stay tuned, there is more to come.